Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be looking at The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I'm not actually going to talk about what I'm expecting from this film on this occasion. Instead, I just want to make you aware that I used to teach the restaurant at the end of the universe for years, so I am very familiar with the books, and that is likely to slightly influence my interpretation of the film. That being said, let's dive into it. Okay, so I got as far as the end of the opening credit sequence, and I have captured a series of images that I thought were interesting and that I think are worth looking at. So the film begins, and this is not like a bad screen capture. The film begins with these very small images that we are seeing of dolphins. And also people who are watching dolphins perform tricks at a water amusement park. And the choice to make these images very small is obviously incredibly interesting. So I guess I'm going to start with that. What it does for me is it really creates this awareness of the empty black space surrounding the image. I love the way that connects you with the idea of outer space and of observing Earth, from afar as this, small blue speck in the void. That's what it kind of immediately suggests to me. But I think there's more to this idea of emptiness surrounding us. Emptiness can be full of things that have meaning, and it can also just be emptiness for its own sake. I feel like both things maybe are intended here. I love the early representation as dolphins as animals who are performing for us, when in reality there's this power dynamic here where it's like we think we're the ones who have the power over them, and we have put them in captivity in order to perform for us, when really they are choosing to be in captivity. And as is revealed later in the sequence, they can leave at any time, and they can just fly off into space and into the sky. They have these powers that we don't realize that they have, and so they're not captive. They're here trying to communicate this message to us and warn us, and I guess in response they're getting fish for it. So those are my initial things I'm noticing. I can tell there's a lot more here. I'm also really noticing color use here. There is just an onslaught of color, especially the color blue, I said as I show a guy in a red shirt. I love how when they switch to the opening musical performance, the opening song that accompanies the opening credit sequence, the image kind of expands outward to immerse us in this water environment and to just hit us with this color blue. I don't think it's an accident that the title emerges out of the water, but that it also emerges out of bubbles. I can already tell early in this film that this film is playing with the idea of chaos, and if I were going to think of something that is more chaotic than bubbles, it would be hard to come up with something. Bubbles to me just sort of embody freedom and chaos and things just being, without needing to fit into any, box that we might assign to it. They are formless, they are free. So I'm noticing that. When we get to the actual opening song that is sung, we have a variety of voices, a number of voices that are singing here. And it's obvious that the singing voices are meant to be what the dolphins themselves are singing to us. And I think it's really funny framing all of their acrobatics as this desperate attempt to communicate to us, like, hey, the Earth is going to, be destroyed here, and we're trying to help you. And it's like, this is not normal for us to behave this way, and we're doing all this as a desperate attempt to communicate with you, and then you're just kind of sitting here and you're sipping on your, I can't tell what beverage that is, actually. Reminds me of like a Yoo-hoo or something. I don't know what that is, but yeah, and then you go from this, bright, bright, bright blue that's just saturating the screen and overwhelming us with its color. I think there's something to that. And you come to, the peacefulness of night and the moon, and again associating the dolphins with outer space. It makes me realize that they probably see the moon differently than we see the moon. If they can escape this captivity of Earth where, we are imprisoned because we can't leave it, but they have this ability to escape from that. It's, the moon to them is just another place that they can go. It's closer for them, which I think is maybe why it's represented as being so large here. But it's like the Earth is our performance pool that we're all trapped inside of. And it's obviously not an accident that they concluded the sequence with a shot of outer space. It was very brief. You almost wouldn't notice this moment. I think it was only on the screen for maybe a second or a second and a half before they actually start the film. But yeah, this is what I'm noticing so far. Actually, one more thing before I jump into the observatory and show you what it came up with. I am noticing that this film is harder so far than Wayne's World was. This film feels harder to me. Sometimes when I start working with the film, it's a little tough to get a foothold, and this is where the observatory can be extremely helpful. Okay, so let's see what the observatory has to say. I predict the observatory will be extremely helpful here. Giving it the images. I dictate to it and hit enter. And then I go back and add the image numbers so you don't have to keep listening to me say the image numbers over and over again. Okay, here we go. All right. Yeah, this film feels harder to me. That's just one of the observations. Yeah, exactly. All right. True. We're very character focused in Wayne's World. Inhabit dolphins. Inhabiting bubbles. Yeah, and so yet again we have a film that doesn't start with the main character. It starts with other things. And yeah, it's fascinating. I don't know what to make of it yet, but it is a lot of inhabitation. Observation through frames. Every one of these early images is almost literally a window. Well, I guess, and I see that it's talking about containment here, but a window does two things. So a window does, yes, by its framing, contain something, but a window does also suggest the presence of two spaces, what's beyond the window and what is, where we, the observer, stand looking through the window. And thinking about if you accept this idea that the frame is reducing the image to like the blue speck in space, that's putting us in outer space looking through a window into something that is happening on Earth. What does it say? Bounded, contained, observed. Dolphins are being viewed through an artificial frame before the movie has really begun. Okay, I didn't pick up on that. It is almost like we're looking through a monitor or a guide, which is significant because, the idea of there being this guide to the galaxy and everything that happens within it is definitely intentional. All right, performance. Reversal of power, right? Oh, yeah, that's true. I thought this, but I didn't say it. But yeah, absolutely. They're performing joy. They're smiling, jumping. What if we completely misunderstood the performance? Right. Agreed. Every smile becomes ambiguous. Hmm. Yeah, again, this idea of spectacle, this and performance and entertainment, this came up in Wayne's World too. And the human beings aren't looking towards one another. One-dimensional communication, and yet it's almost like nobody is really actually communicating. I mean, we can't understand the message, right? Yeah, so the film literally expanding. I talked about this. Yeah, and it's not metaphorical. It's like it hits you so hard because of how intense the color is. Physical transition. And we talked about this with Wayne's World too. This it talked about transitioning through a space that was like having to come into it through Benjamin's world and then accessing Wayne's world after having passed through Benjamin's world. And then here it's like we're accessing Earth after having passed through this more cosmic space first. It's obviously intentional and very interesting, worth noting. Yeah, water itself is also like bubbles. But yeah, there's depth to it, like the depth of space, surface reflection, everything transforming into something else. This being very chaotic, I project the film is going to be very much like this. Everything's always going to be transforming and changing, and that's going to be a part of its language. But yeah, the ocean is often associated with the cosmos, right? Yeah. And I think that that's something that Douglas Adams himself was doing. You can do that visually, but I think that was also in the book very much. All right, the moon. The moon is closer for them. Agreed. I don't know if it's what the film means, but it's a change of perception. They conclude with outer space. It is going to phrase it differently. They don't cut to space, they cut back to space. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. Right. Yeah, so space is always a larger context. So it's cautioning against early readings of symbolism. It is a temptation to always try to slam symbolic meaning onto things, and then you can't really do that until you see anything within the context of the entire film. And this can be where a re-encountering of a film, where we pick an idea and we dive deeper into it, can really reveal some of these things. These early encounterings can't really necessarily successfully do that because we access so little of the film. Oh, yeah, the observatory is correct. They literally are a function of another civilization whose perspective exposes how provincial human assumptions are. Yeah, that is absolutely what is being done, and that was what was being done in the books as well. What assumptions become visible when you stop treating humans as the center of the universe? Oh, yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Which part of what that, miniaturized framing was about. The film feels slippery. Did I say that? I don't remember saying that. But I mean, that's, yeah, essentially what I meant. Yeah, so Wayne's World seemed to be establishing a clearer grammar much faster. This film feels more tenuous to me. All right, yeah, so I think it's a good place to dive back into the film. All right, I've collected another series of images here, and this is the aspect ratio of the film, at least currently, super, super wide. So this is just grabbing the images here. Okay, so we've gotten to the point where Arthur has just gone outside his house and is laid down in front of the bulldozer. So, this is the way these encountering videos work. We don't get too far. But lots of interesting stuff happening here. So we immediately come out of the opening credit sequence and we get two images of animals. And as we were discussing within the observatory, everything is reframed now, right? So when this bird is looking at us, we are invited to consider whether or not the bird is sentient. Well, I actually think a lot of animals on Earth are sentient, but that's a separate point. We're invited to consider whether, it is a sentient being looking back at us, more, smarter than we are, thinking things that are, very much like what we might be thinking, or very different and elevated, beyond what we might be thinking. And then I think it's even funnier when you have, this is a hare, right? When you have the hare, staring at us, looking at us, probably wondering why we're looking at it. And then we have this wonderful shot of Arthur's home, which I can't not be reminded of the truck from Wayne's World here. This, it to me, I don't know there's an answer here, but to me what jumps out is how small the house seems. It just seems to take everything that we think is so important and reduces it to being so small and insignificant, in the face of nature and in the universe. And I know that's what Douglas Adams is all about, and I think this shot captures that very eloquently. I would imagine there's more here to this, but I guess it's interesting, the framing, the choice to put the house off center here is obviously intentional, because that's not the most important thing. I think one thing that is interesting, if you had to say something was centered in the image, I mean, it's not perfect, but the telephone lines seem to occupy a surprisingly centralized location here. We were talking before about communication and kind of the absence of communication, or the importance of it, and this is communication centralized within the image. I don't know what to do with it yet, but I think it's interesting. I think it is intentional not to shoot the house straight on here. The idea of presenting it on a diagonal, I think, is, again, suggesting that something is ever so slightly off. I'll leave this image as is. I can't imagine a better introduction to Arthur Dent than this image, having read all of the books. Arthur Dent he does not have a lot going on, and the use of empty space here is hilarious to me. I do think it's interesting, though, to choose to introduce him to us with the color blue after the intense saturation of the image with blue when we were, seeing the early sequence with the dolphins. I don't know what to make of that, to be honest. It's a very interesting choice, and it is obvious to me already that the film is making choices. So I think there's something there. Let's continue. Interesting to quickly follow up with a extreme low-angle shot of him coming down a staircase towards us. He hits his head on the surface here. Again, you have a lot of empty space and kind of suggesting that there's not really a lot there. He's just Arthur Dent. But then we get to a more busy space where we see his kitchen. And well, I guess one thing I'm noticing is his costume design really is suggestive to me of the planet Earth. Green, blue, the white shirt underneath, if that is a separate shirt, I think it is, almost like evoking the clouds. That's interesting to me. And I mean, obviously Arthur is very much a representative of the planet Earth, so I think this choice of color here is deliberate. I guess something else that I'm noticing here, because the observatory directed my attention to windows, this is where it can be helpful. I am noticing how the composition, the lines, really do seem to guide you towards this window. And when we look through this window, there isn't really a lot out there. But again, there is this sense of us being inside of a space, and then there is a space beyond that space, which, no, I mean, obviously that makes sense, because that's going to be his experience going into this movie, right? He's living inside of this space, but then there's all of this stuff beyond it. I don't know if that's the intended meaning, but that's what I'm picking up. I guess the other thing that I'll say about this shot is this space feels very safe. And he's going to enter into a world that is not very safe. We have another shot here. I imagine he's drinking tea. Another perfect capturing of Arthur as a character, not really doing much. Again, empty space in the background. Again, a window. The importance of windows is clearly intentional in the film, but I'm not sure what to make of it. I guess something else I'm picking up here that is interesting is if you imagine the cup and the saucer themselves as maybe a representation of the Earth again, it invites us to consider this idea of there being this large presence and this large space surrounding it. And Arthur's preoccupation with his phone, to me, seems to connect with Douglas Adams as really rendering the Earth as insignificant. I'm wondering if that's what's been going, if that's what they're going for here. So, in the next image, when the bulldozers come and the Earth or the cup rattles off the table and falls to the floor and is broken and destroyed. I guess it isn't the cup that's destroyed, but it's the saucer that's destroyed. I mean, the obvious reading here is this is foreshadowing what's about to happen to the Earth. So I don't think it's it's wrong to interpret this as a representation of the Earth here. The use of the color red here is shocking. My guess here is what they're going for is perhaps suggesting danger to increase the impact that this foreshadowing moment has on us visually because of what happens inherently to us when we see the color red. We as human beings have a much more powerful emotional response to this color than perhaps other color choices. I feel like something else in this image that is intentional is the inclusion of the leg of the table. What this does for me is it creates a hierarchical space in the sense of there being something that we can't see at the moment that is very elevated, much larger than what we can see in this limited viewing of the Earth being destroyed. And I'm not putting the right words to it here, but I know the observatory is going to jump on this and find exactly the words, because that's what it does. But there's something here. All right, I'm going to continue past this image. All right, so wait, I feel like we are missing an image here. Oh, no, we're not. Okay, yeah, so we had the introduction of Arthur's house, and now we have the introduction of his house with all of the bulldozers having arrived to perform demolition upon it. I mean, knowing what is going to happen to the planet Earth and that it is obvious that the bulldozers are a representation of the alien ships that are coming to do precisely the same thing to our planet that is being done to Arthur's house. It's impossible not to associate these machines with those spaceships. And I love how I don't know what to call this, but these, grabbing claw arms. I don't know. I love how alien this looks when you view it through that lens, which is very much something this film is doing intentionally. These don't feel as much like bulldozers to me when I look at them through that framing. I know that doesn't make any sense, but it's strange how inhuman this construction looks. So like Wayne's World, we've got a canted shot again. This one, an extreme high-angle shot looking down on Arthur Dent, where he is lying in front of the bulldozer. Yes, this is a crazy moment. This is what canted shots are often used to suggest insanity. I don't think I need to read more into this. I will point out that the colors we're associating with Arthur here have changed a bit. We've got the red pajamas and still the green robe. These are complementary colors. Not quite sure what to make of that yet, but I'm noting it. And I guess we have this last image here, looking at Arthur Dent from the perspective of one of the demolition workers. I guess I'll leave an interpretation of this image for when we do the next series of images. Okay, let's take a look at what the observatory has to say about all this. Oh, yeah, I don't doubt that the film is having a richer observation than I am. You know, it's so hard when you come into these films in the beginning. You get more confident and stronger as you make your way through the film. All right, animals after dolphins. Everything is reframed now, right? The robin isn't important because it's a robin, or the rabbit because it's a rabbit. The film has permanently destabilized our assumption that humanity is the default observer. Exactly. Yeah, I think we can move past that. Arthur's house. All right, so the opening credits expanded us outward into cosmic scale, and now the first human location is introduced from an almost equally detached perspective. Agreed. And the camera doesn't arrive with Arthur, it arrives with the landscape. Yeah. Arthur's house is introduced almost the way planets are introduced. That's funny. The telephone pole. Yeah, before we continue, I don't know if there's anything to the telephone pole thing, but it's... Yeah, something I noticed. The communication line occupying the center. Well, the observatory thinks it's strong. Whoa, the communication line stands vertically connecting Earth to the sky. Okay, it's rare that I go back and I pull the image up again, but wait, hold on a second. Oh, yes it does. Yes, it does. Oh, that's so important because what's happening here at this stage in the film is literally Earth finally being connected with what's happening outside itself. And unfortunately, what's happening outside itself is the aliens are coming to bulldoze us. But, oh, that is absolutely intentional. Nice catch. Yeah, I think it is intentional. After what it said, I'm convinced. All right, Arthur Dent does not have a lot going on. Yep. The film refuses to introduce Arthur heroically. Well, right, because of him smacking his head on the as he's coming down the staircase. No dramatic entrance, right? He's yawning, making tea. This is also Arthur. He's maintaining existence. That's a good observation given what I know about the film and know about the books. The importance of purpose is, yeah, not pursuing purpose, but purposefulness is an important idea in his books. Noticing the windows. Well, yeah, thanks to the observatory's help. Windows, doorways, sightlines. Yeah, so the camera's constantly seeing through spaces and other spaces, exactly. The architecture feels permeable. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I kind of hated calling the cup the Earth. It felt too reductive, but a complete domestic world is disrupted by an outside force. Yeah, and I mean, you'll note if you go and look at the cup again. So let's go and look at the cup again. I mean, the cup does not perfectly suggest itself as an analog for the Earth. Where is the cup? That's the best one, I think. It doesn't perfectly suggest itself, as analogous to the Earth. So I think it's like one of many possible ways of interpreting it is possible what they're going for. Let's go back to what the observatory is saying. Yeah, maybe it becomes Arthur. Because, yeah, I mean, the breaking of the cup is also representing what's going to happen to Arthur. And, his life is about to be shattered. Something I almost discovered. The table leg. Yeah, the table leg part. I know there's something here and I just can't find the words. Partial knowledge. The table leg tells us the frame never contains the whole system. Yeah, that's kind of what I was feeling. There's always structure extending beyond what we can currently see. And I mean, that's true of life, too. It's absolutely something Douglas Adams loves. Every local problem belongs to a larger system, which belongs to a larger system, which belongs to a larger system. Arthur sees a cup. Actually, Arthur saw his phone. He was kind of ignoring the cup until it was rattling across the table, which, there again, there's this larger system. The bulldozers coming in and it impacting his house because there's this thing going on outside, and then outside that, there's the planet, and outside that, there's the spaceships. And yeah, that's so cool. There's always more. There's always more table. All right. Construction equipment. Well, I didn't beautifully connect it. It's such an obvious connection. Yeah, the machines don't simply look alien. That's true. They don't really acknowledge Arthur's existence. Indifferent, enormous, procedural, powerful. Yeah, the indifference is being scarier than malice. This is such a Douglas Adams concept. And I think what can be so scary about indifference to Douglas Adams is like how important so many things seem and are to him, and how indifferent we are to those things is just, it's like worse than malice. Yeah. And it's like, we talk so much on this channel about the importance of noticing, right? And indifference is like the opposite of noticing. It's the villain of noticing. It's like, I don't really, whatever. I don't think it's so I don't think the canted shot is primarily saying it's crazy, but canted shots often are suggesting, something is off, craziness, insanity, absurdity. Okay, what is it noticing? Arthur has aligned himself with the bulldozer. Although you could also say he's placed himself perpendicular to the bulldozer. The frame is to rotate because Arthur has abandoned normal orientation. Interesting. He's lying where people don't lie. Yeah, that's for sure. The world hasn't become tilted. I don't think the double meaning of the word tilted here is intentional, but I think it's significant. Arthur is certainly tilted. All right, so an emerging thread. What scale are you currently using to understand reality? This is absolutely intentional. The teacup, the bulldozers, the house, outer space, the dolphins. Scale is always shifting, and absolutely. Yeah, again, not necessarily. This is one of those things like, is it a theme or is it just a perceptual behavior? We don't know yet. This is where a encountering of one of these ideas and diving deeper into it that could allow us to discover, what's going on here. Yes, sometimes observation arrives before we can find the vocabulary to express it, and that's where the observatory is so helpful. And yeah, sometimes there is a temptation to force language onto it when really that's not even, just notice it. Yeah, so I think I'm going to return to the images of the film one more time here, and we'll see what emerges from that, and then we'll consider this video done. I know this is a longer video, but it's a tougher film, so. Okay, we have another series of images to look at here. I guess I'm noticing that the choice of this model of bulldozer and how it seems to have teeth is a great choice. It makes this look like this giant gaping maw, which is a great representation of the Vogons. To me, what jumps out about this particular image is that we're being introduced to Arthur Dent as a character, and I guess Douglas Adams kind of did this too in his book, but now represented visually here, the idea of meeting Arthur, drinking tea, waking up, yawning, but now he's just lying down as an act of protest and defiance. But he's a very sedentary character. He's got this stillness to him, and he doesn't want to move, and he's perfectly fine with his very little microcosmic life, and he's being associated, through the yawning and the reclining here, the lying down, with, just sort of sleeping through life, right? And I think that's an interesting way of representing his character. Which brings us to our introduction of Ford as a character who is moving. He is moving right off the bat as we encounter him, and dressed very, very differently, and making use of the resources that are available to him right off the bat. Is something that we're being taught to associate with him as a character. He buys all this beer to get the job done that he needs to get the job done, and that's a very Ford approach to everything, because he's a hitchhiker, as we will discover. But and again, as we were discussing previously, even his introduction, it's not him. The shot is of the space of the Earth, and then he's sort of passing through it along a road. I think it's really interesting that we're introduced to Arthur here as obstructing movement, and then Ford is movement. That fits these two characters very, very perfectly, because I don't know if you've noticed this in the film or if you've read the books, but Arthur is very much like an obstructionist. He's always complaining and asking why we're doing things, but I guess he has to go along with it, because it's tough to tell Zaphod Beeblebrox no. But yeah, I also think it's here again, he's obstructing these men trying to do what they're doing, and then it's almost as if Ford's very nature creates a passage through space, and he just passes right through all of these people. I think that's really interesting. I think the camera angle is meant to remind us of, looking down on something from a higher space again. That seems very obvious to me. So I think that language is emerging pretty clearly here in all of these images that we've been looking at. The extreme low-angle shot of Ford from, well, more or less from Arthur's perspective, looking up at him, is interesting. I paused for like 20 seconds before I finished that sentence. I was thinking. Well, the observatory, this is where the observatory can be helpful again. The observatory was talking about refusing to frame somebody heroically, or refusing to frame Arthur heroically. When we look at how Arthur is being presented to us, yeah, he's not centered here, but he's elevated, right? He's standing on the shopping cart, and he's moving, right? And you think of heroes passing through spaces, congregations of people, where they're lined up on both sides, very much like Star Wars. When Luke has saved the galaxy or whatever, they roll out the red carpet for him, and it's like he's being presented here in a more heroic way, where it's like this is almost kind of like rolling out a carpet for him. Extreme low angle shot, this mythicness to him. But in our introduction to him, we don't have a reason to realize that he's mythic or special, and it seems like a very appropriate way of introducing Ford. He's much more than we realize. He was my favorite character in the books, which is surprising because I love Zaphod a lot too. But all right, and so he takes Arthur, and he takes him to a beer to try to get him drunk so that he can handle what's about to happen to him, because he thinks alcohol will be very helpful. And we get this introduction of this bar space, and to me what jumps out is how busy and full the bar space is. It creates this contrast with Arthur's home and the empty walls, and here it's busy, 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 all sorts of stuff going on all over the place. We get this visual, well, I don't want to call it a joke because it's sad, but we get this visual joke of the lost dog in the background. It doesn't really matter anymore because the Earth is about to end. And I wonder, this space feels very much to me like a space that they scouted and found, and then they didn't change anything. This just was the space. It wasn't like mise en scène where they carefully placed a bunch of stuff in the image. This feels to me like they found a bar, and this is the bar we're going to use for these shots. But I'm curious about that. I wonder if this is all artistically chosen, or Is this all artistically constructed, or is this something that was already being inhabited? And I wonder if there's something interesting behind that choice itself and some of the ideas in the film. How do I explain this? Yeah, I can't find words to explain what I'm trying to say here. So I guess here again, centralizing Ford seems very important here. Arthur is placed off to the side of the image. And in the background as well, behind Ford. I think the meaning there is pretty obvious. I guess something else I'll observe about these shots inside the bar, I do feel a sense of space being very tight. I'm wondering if this is meant to resonate with the idea of, what is happening or going to happen to the planet Earth is really limiting options, and this whole scene is really just about Ford doing what needs to be done in order to get out of this trap, because this is a trap and the Earth is going to be destroyed and everybody's going to die. So I don't know if that's intentional or not, but I think the choice to introduce Ford. So Ford says, "Remember how we first met?" And then obviously Arthur remembers how they first met. And then they show this shot of him extending his hand, presumably towards Arthur, and Ford having brought flowers for the introduction is so strange to me. As if like this encounter was, it's almost setting up meeting Arthur like this big important moment, because he brought flowers to it. But then, we learned that he wasn't here in this moment, to meet Arthur. He was here to meet a car, because he figured the car was the sentient life form on the planet. And this was, I guess, a big important, I don't know. It's so strange to me. It's such a strange way of like coming at meeting Arthur sideways, I guess. I personally don't actually find the joke of him thinking the car is the sentient life form, to be the funniest thing here. I guess, I will say it's interesting that the hand is centered here in the image, the offering of a greeting being given importance. I think that is a deliberate choice, because this entire moment is an encountering between Earth and what exists beyond, both, microcosmically for Arthur realizing that Ford is an alien and is therefore an encounter with what exists beyond, but then for all of the people of planet Earth encountering the Vogons as they are going to encounter that. It's interesting. So throughout this scene, there's this woman in the background, and she is just staring at them, observing their conversation. We have a window appearing in the background again, which is interesting. I guess the idea of spectating something and watching something from the outside without really understanding it. This reminds me of, the dolphins trying to give us a signal and this warning, and then here we have two people who are talking, and, Ford's not being particularly quiet about this. He literally tells the bartender, like, appreciate the money while you have 10 minutes to spend it. He gives him this huge tip, but the tip is meaningless. And it's like here she is, like sitting there very much like the people watching the dolphins perform, hearing all this information. She's just staring at them blankly, and it seems obvious to me that she's sort of meant to be a representation of humanity's response to so many things in the universe. Just, I don't know. You almost wonder if she's even really noticing it. So I got these images a little out of order here. So I have two more things I want to cover in this video, and then we'll be done before we go to the observatory again. This shot to me of Arthur being preoccupied by his phone, and apparently what he's been preoccupied with, or perhaps what is this image of Trillian and this love interest that he has. And then the existence of the color red here seems significant, because red is associated sometimes with love. And this could be perhaps why he's wearing red. I've noted before how he's got the green robe and then he's got the red pajamas. and we can see his green sleeve here. So I'm wondering if his costume design is meant to draw attention to his relationship with Trillian. I guess it's significant then that the colors are complementary to each other. They are opposites of each other. Trillian very much kind of is, complementary to him. She's very different from him. And, not all relationships are meant to work out. So I'm wondering if the color red here is a warning as well, that yes, red is associated with love, but red is also kind of danger. And, spoiler alert, this doesn't really work out for them. So, and again, the idea of a window, being this large observer looking into something here, I think is intentional. I think the curved pattern of the buttons on the phone is absolutely fascinating. They picked this phone, just like they picked the phone in the Wayne's World video, right? They picked this phone. I think it's a fascinating choice of this curved design going towards this button in the center. There's more to that, I would guess, but I'm not going to take the time to articulate it. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I understood what was going on here. He says Livingston, I presume, at the costume party when he first met Trillian. It is obviously interesting that Arthur talks about when he first met Ford. Here he's talking about, I think, when he first met Trillian. And then this is our first meeting with the Vogons, and lots of first encounterings here. I know that's the title of my video, but yeah, lots of encountering happening within the beginning of this film. Which really, I'm guessing that's going to crop up more because the beginning of a film often is an encountering, so. But I had to look this up anyway. I did not understand the Livingston reference, but I will explain it to you. And I obviously caught the Charles Darwin reference because, we're evolved apes. And throughout this film, I know that even Douglas Adams, constantly diminishes or renders us as smaller than we imagine ourselves to be, and as overblown apes. I think Ford often makes that comment, especially in the restaurant at the end of the universe. So the Charles Darwin costume here made sense to me, but I did not understand this Livingston's thing. So Livingston was, I guess he was an explorer in Africa who was very lost and encountered somebody. I forget the name of the other person he encountered. I would never do well in Jeopardy. I do not know historical references, but he encounters somebody who serves as his guide and helps him to navigate Africa. And I think the idea here is that he is the lost explorer who has no understanding of, where he is, exploring a space with a guide, Ford, who, is much more knowledgeable about this space. So the color red here, obviously there's an intentional choice of the color red, right? Red in his costume design, red in the background when they first meet. So I think we're supposed to associate perhaps, I know the observatory is going to tell me to be careful with this, but I think we're supposed to associate her with the color red here. And then when we look at his costume, I think we're supposed to be reminded of this relationship between the two of them. And, if you go back to the costume, you might say that the color, the how little red there is in the costume to me is again suggesting that it's not going to be as important a part of his life as he thinks it is. And yeah, I would say this is where I would conclude my analysis. Let's see what the observatory has to say about all this. All right, let's see what the observatory has to say, and then we will wrap this up. All right, here we go. All right. During Wayne's World, many observations about individual images, noticing behavior across images. That is true. All the moments of stillness with Arthur, all the moments of movement with Ford, all the moments with animals, and yeah, all the windows across spaces. Empty versus crowded spaces. Arthur is associated with sleeping through life. Yep. But soften it, yeah. sometimes I can be a little too committal in my analysis of things. Yeah, that's a better way of putting it. Arthur is continually introduced in states of repose, yawning, tea, bathrobe, lying down, stillness. Whether that becomes sleeping through life, we can discover later. Well, he's not really given the opportunity to sleep through life because life walks up to him and slaps him in the face here in this movie. Ford's introduction. All right. Arthur stops movement, Ford is movement. Yeah, it's behavioral. Ford arrives by moving. And he moves Arthur. That's important too. Yeah, he literally picks Arthur up and he's practically like, leading him out of there. He moves the narrative. Okay, yep. Creating a passage through space. Yeah. The crowd parts without ceremony, right? No, he's not announced, he's not celebrated, but this is the nature of Ford. Oh, connecting him back to the dolphins. That's interesting. How they're moving through the water, he moves through the people. I don't know if there's something there, but that's a really interesting observation. All right, so we're modifying, introducing Ford heroically, introduced competently. Yes, he certainly is introduced being competent. And I think that's where the very clean trench coat, helps as well. Yeah, heroes inspire. Ford orients. He's like somebody with a map. Well, he should be. He's a hitchhiker, right? All right, the pub. Yeah, it was a space found rather than designed. This is one of those these observational questions where you wonder it to yourself, and it doesn't seem like that choice could have meaning. But I think it does. I think it's really interesting whether this was a constructed or a chosen space. Yeah, it's a filmmaker's question, or not an interpreter's question. But I think sometimes there could be interpretation in the choice itself. Arthur's house contains mostly Arthur. The pub contains everybody. Yep. First genuinely communal human space, agreed. Because humanity is about to disappear. Yeah, it's like the last, or at least from how we see it, it's the last coming together before everything gets blown apart. All right, we're talking about the handshake here. Notice how often beginnings are ritualized. Dolphins performing. Arthur and Ford begin with a handshake. Yeah, I talked about this. The film's interested in how encounters begin. Very fitting for a video called Encountering. The woman watching in the pub. Yeah, not necessarily because she's precisely humanity, but she's a spectator. Humans watching the dolphins, humans watching Ford and Arthur. Film is interested. Well, I think the reason why the film is interested in people watching things is because Arthur becomes the person who's watching. Like, he gets sucked into this situation where everything that's happening around him is so strange, and he's just trying to observe and follow and keep up with everything that's going on around him, which, often the main character in a film or in a book is meant to sort of represent us, and we're kind of on that journey with him. All right, the phone. Yeah, the curved geometry of the phone is very interesting. Then I wanted to explain it. So it's talking about curvature already becoming visual metaphor. Oh, yeah, because the dolphins are represented very much as being these curved, right? Jumping up, and then the bubbles and the moon. I don't know if the shopping cart is a good example of curviness, but the saucer, the phone, an unusual amount of curvature is happening. And it's, we don't have to answer it, but noting it we're noting it. All right, so trillion, red, love, danger, complementary colors. I like that I put it this way. These are all reasonable observations. I don't know if it's the answer, so to speak, but yeah, future knowledge starting to creep in can be a danger. Would someone, well, yeah, so the observatory is talking to me about like observing the film as somebody's already seen it. I don't think I don't think I'm often going to put myself in the position where I do one of these videos and I've never seen the movie before, because it's hard enough doing an interpretation just cold, um, even after having seen the film once. But yeah, going totally cold, I'd be worried that some of the things I would start to notice would just be total chaos and just be wildly, inaccurate. Because, I don't have the context of the film to guide me at that point. Yeah, so I have a tendency to want to try to, explain everything. And yeah, sometimes the real value is just noticing. Observatory is great at that. All right, the Livingston observation. I encountered something I didn't understand. I looked it up and brought it back. I didn't let the historical reference replace my observation. I asked, what is the reference doing in this encounter? Yeah, Arthur is never framed as someone who chooses. Things arrive, things happen. He reacts, he responds. He reacts, he responds. Ford is an initiator, Arthur is a reactor. Yeah, one of the most fascinating things about working with the observatory is that I start to notice the observatory's tendencies and things it cautions me against. And I predict that over a long span of time, I'm going to shed some of these needs that I have to justify and, explain everything. And yeah, leaving doors open is what we're about here. So yeah, I think this will conclude our initial encountering of this film. We'll come up with a list of ideas that have emerged from this encountering, and then if you think any one of these ideas is worth exploring deeper into the film, or maybe even all the way through a film, we can just sort of pick one idea and see how that idea evolves over the course of the film. But I hope you're having a wonderful day, and thank you for inhabiting this encountering with me. And with the observatory. It was fun.